this is all a part of MSBM Teaching and Learning Committee, where there was a need for this workshop. And before I say anything further, I am going to invite Dr. Graham to give us a all right, Dr. Graham.
I think you just gave us welcome, but anyway, again, I would say thanks for coming. I'm quite disappointed with the turnout because I think it's an extremely important activity, and we're trying to facilitate, have these activities on the weekends, on the evening, to facilitate also the lab normal adjunct faculty we have, which is why we try to have it during these times. And I guess we'll have to see moving forward what is best, whether we have it at a time full-time come or what's best. But we really have to have that dialogue because I think, as I said, there's a lot more persons that we would want to be here for this, what we consider essential for all our faculty to keep up to date with the learning practices. One of the criticisms or feedback we have got, whether from our external examiners, from our accreditation bodies that come in and assess us, is that we don't have consistency in feedback and assessment and feedback across courses. So some are giving a lot more feedback than others, and there's different ways to assess that maybe we're not utilizing as best as we could. So we feel this is essential. As I said, the feedback is coming back from our external evaluators, and so we thought it's very important to have this session. We are taping it, so hopefully we can make it available as a podcast or in whatever way we can, so we get to a larger constituency. So again, Dr. Chisholm has made the effort to come out on a Saturday. Many of you may know him already, but he's the head of the Center of Excellence in Teaching and Learning on the Mona campus, and they do a lot of activities like this that we think, as I said, are important for all our faculty that are delivering both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So we really want to thank you for coming out, and I know we'll all get something from this, and hopefully we put it back into the classroom. So thank you very much. And maybe we could introduce ourselves. Well, you want to? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm told that colleagues from the Western campus are actually watching us or being a part of the workshop online, so I have to use a mic. Normally I don't need a mic. So I will be using this mic. Alright, so as Dr. Graham and Dr. Shevers indicated, as Dr. Graham and Dr. Shevers indicated, the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning is the area of in it. It will take some time because we usually just do one course per semester, and it's a 15 credit program, so it will take perhaps a year and a half since it's just one course usually per semester. Faculty is hardly able to do much more than that anyhow with your teaching load, and especially adjunct people with your teaching load and other activities, then it might not be feasible at all to do more than one course per semester. At least we have one faculty member here who has gone through the program and has graduated with her UWI certificate. It's a full-fledged UWI certificate in teaching and learning, and of course that can be a part of your resume, your transcript from the UWI. It's a graduate certificate in teaching and learning. All right, so there are some learning outcomes that we utilize, we will be utilizing. Determine the meaning of assessment and evaluation. That's important. What are we doing when we're assessing? And especially since we're going to talk about feedback, we need to also understand that there is a little difference between assessment and evaluation. Oftentimes the literature makes it sound as if they are actually the same thing, and sometimes it is used the terms are used interchangeably, but there is a slight variation between the terms. How are we going to assess? Decide on approaches to creating assessment tasks. That's important. What are the best practices in giving feedback? And use best practices to provide feedback to students. And so, coming out of the workshop, we hope we would have talked about some of the best practices, and then we can move forward to using these best practices. I'm not sure if I said welcome to the persons at the Western Jamaica campus. I don't think I did. So if they're on yet, they are there, then welcome. Yes, like Dr. Graham had indicated that perhaps we should introduce ourselves, and there was a slide that would talk about that, and we are at that slide now. Might we remember you? And we will have about 30 seconds or so, or perhaps. But since there are fewer of us than we had thought, then we might be able to use 60 seconds to just say who we are, our name, what we teach, and how might we remember you. And one good way to remember you is to tell us, to describe yourself using an adjective that begins your first name. All right, so I'll start the ball. So I am Merciful Mervyn. I am full of mercy. And so you'll remember me by that. And I am the coordinator, manager coordinator for the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And I also teach from time to time, almost every semester really, in the School of Education. And I teach one course to the School of Nursing. Well, students who are doing a master's in nursing education. I teach education. All right, so we're going to move around. Will they need to use the mic too?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, that's why you're here.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Sharon Featon Wedwood. I'm a banker by profession for almost 30 years. And I have about 12 years lecturing experience. I just completed, not last year, but the year before, I graduated with a postgraduate in university teaching and learning. It was really an awesome course and changed the way I lecture. I lecture with the School of Business, organizational behavior in the afternoon. I also do customer experience with the weekend program, and I started out at, where did I start? Open Campus. I'm sincere, Sharon. I'm really sincere about adult education and making an impact on young people, because I believe that education is not just about getting a degree, it should transform your life.
Good morning, I'm Delroy Shevers. I'm a lecturer in the Mona School of Business and Management. I consider myself dedicated to Delroy. And in my classes, it's all about fun. And so some learning experiences.
Good morning, everyone. I am logical Lila. I think. But maybe too black and white sometimes, but I guess I'm from a science background, so maybe that's influenced how I am. I am the Deputy Executive Director here at Mona School of Business and Management, mainly in charge of the MBA program, but I also lecture in information systems.
Good morning, everyone.
I'm Tennille Rashford, Tenacious Tennille. I'm a lecturer here at Mona School of Business and Management. I lecture the Human Resource Management course as well as the Management of Change course. I believe in helping my students to take a firm grip on the opportunity that they have, educational opportunities here, and also to develop themselves as individuals who can help others in the future.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Peru, Creative Craig. I'm a research fellow here at MSBM, and I teach project management in the MBA course, as well as in our executive education courses.
My name, I am Carol Rowe, and I would describe myself as caring Carol. I care about my students, their development, and I want to also ensure that every student in my class is on the right track at the university. I'm an adjunct lecturer, and over here at Mona School of Business, I teach communication skills for managers and quality service management. I also teach communication skills over the Faculty of Social Science Weekend program.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Grace Cowan. That's gorgeous Grace. I am an adjunct lecturer, Mona School of Business, and I love teaching. I'm very dedicated, and I love the interaction that I have with my students. They learn from me. I also learn from them. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I am Olivine Thomas. I'm original Olivine. I am from the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. My relationship to MSBM is that I'm a member of the alumni. I don't teach here. I teach in the Sociology Department in Social Work.
Lectures from my undergrad, so it's quite interesting, and I am experienced in supply chain management.
Morning, my name is Paulette Henry, and perhaps I can be described as passionate Paulette, maybe a little bit too much so sometimes, but hopefully I'm forgiven when I do. I teach communications, marketing, and management, and you're familiar with me because I take a number of your sessions, so I need not say more. Just looking forward to today's session. If you use a word that starts with your first name.
That's easy. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charming Christine. What else do I need to say? Of course, communication skills for managers. Looking forward to a fantastic time.
All right. Are the persons online wanting to come in? No, they can't. All right. So we're going to start the morning with a little activity. I'm certain some of you know it. Think, pair, share. So we have an activity that we think about it. We talk to our partner, the person beside us, our neighbor, and then we come back. It's just about a 3-minute exercise usually. So basically, we would say break into groups of 2. Think about the terms assessment, evaluation, and measurement. I meant measurement here, and measurement. Measure, and share your thoughts with your partner. What are these terms? What's the meaning of these terms in an educational context? Indicate to your partner the ways by which you differentiate between the terminologies, and then we share with a larger group. So what's assessment? What's evaluation? We are particularly interested in those two because sometimes we mix them up. And we could talk a little bit about measurement or scoring and so on. So for a minute, you think about the terms, and And then for another minute, you perhaps will share with the person nearest to you. The process it. One of the things why we do this is that in large classes, it's an excellent exercise for lecturers to use to help their students to process information, to think about the information together, and to share with someone. Sometimes you're talking or lecturing and so on, and it's going over their heads and they're not really paid. You call them now to think about it, to process it, and it is often more meaningful, at least those who will do it. Of course some won't, but that's another thing. Alright.
So the main terms are assessment and evaluation.
Yeah, those are the ones that we are most interested in this morning. So a minute to think about it and a minute to perhaps just share with your neighbor. Alright, so you know, how do we respond? Who would like to begin the ball rolling and say what you thought together? In, you know, I didn't see many people sharing, but you don't get to share yet? All right, I'll give you another minute then to exchange thoughts. All right, colleagues, we have to stop now, and we want to get a few responses from the floor. We're talking about assessment, and we're talking about, in particular, evaluation, and there are other terms we use in conversations of this nature what we mean by measurement, what we mean by scoring, and so on. But for the purposes of this conversation, we want to pay particular attention to assessment. So who wants to share? So I guess you will have to use the mic for the purposes of our Western Jamaica.
All right, so Craig and I were discussing in terms of assessment. I think we agree that assessment is more about determining whether or if students have learned. Evaluation for us would be more about how they have learned, or if they have not learned, why. So that the looking at the different levels, the different cognitive levels of learning, you know, are they understanding at the knowledge level, comprehension level only, or is there evaluation and synthesis, that sort of a thing at the higher cognitive levels? So evaluation is a little bit more than assessment in terms of the detail or depth of learning. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. And any other comments? Olivine?
Thanks. I thought that assessment was an activity or task that you would use to gauge the extent to which the body of knowledge that you're trying to impart has been received by the people. Evaluation was to see the quality of the engagement with the task or the wider body of knowledge. And measurement was was judging that quality against an objective standard. That's what I thought.
Yeah, I was saying I come from the old school where we wrote on the chalkboard in those days. And I taught for quite a few years in a teacher's college. So my students were teachers. And so I usually circle the letter M in assessment to remind them that really and truly assessment is about measurement. You know, somebody said we wanted to find out if the students have really learned. You know, so we are going to do something. We're going to engage in some activities to find out. And then having done that something, having found out whether they are learning, then we will make a judgment. And that's the evaluation. So when we say, well done, you know, we're giving feedback, but feedback comes because we have done some assessment and we're now making a statement, a judgment on their work. I think on this slide, well, we talk about scoring, assessment. And so for us in education, that measurement might very well be the test, so that we can score numerically, or, you know, in most cases. Of course, you can do it qualitatively too. And that's what we talk about, scoring. And that measurement is actually, for educational purposes, what we're going to do to demonstrate that the learning is taking place, the tests, or the activities that we are going to, and then evaluation, the process of determining the worth. I heard that being said, the quality, what quality of learning is taking place. And so this is important because we're going to talk about feedback later on. And so our feedback will emerge from the assessments that we have engaged in. And assessment doesn't have to be formal. There can be all kinds of informal assessment going on. We would come to that in a while. So, for our purposes as lecturers, we are going to be mostly involved in classroom and course assessment. Of course, there are other kinds of assessment taking place. For instance, we at UWI, we are preparing for some kind of institutional assessment right now. The UCJ is coming to look at what we are doing, and and reaccredit the institution, I believe, for another 7 years. And so we have prepared our statements, or we have looked at what we are doing, and we have done our self-study, send it to them, and they're going to review all of these, come in and talk to us, talk to students, and so on. So that's institutional assessment. They're carrying out an institutional assessment, and at the end of it, they will make a statement, an evaluation of the worth of our programs, and no doubt will be accredited again for 7 years. There are different phases of assessment that all of us are somehow involved in. Certainly, formative and summative assessment are what we do all the time as members of the academic communities. So what are these really? I know some of us have come to CETL all the time, and we have taken several workshops. So perhaps you would like to tell us about these. Yes. Well, types, okay. I mean, the literature might be different, might name them in different ways. But I like to talk about the phases. Some books indeed call them the types of assessment, and so on. That's one of the things with education. We might not be as precise as the sciences or even the social sciences generally. All right? But I thought you were going to tell us. I think you have to use it. He has to use the mic. It's really nice. We'll get another mic.
The diagnostic assessment, my experience is to ascertain the position or the body of knowledge, or make an assessment at a point in time, especially at the beginning. Formative assessment would be one you'd be doing as you go along, and it leads up to, it culminates in an overall assessment, either feeds into or leads to a summative assessment, which is usually done at the end of your period of facilitation, shall we say.
Yes, wonderful. No doubt all of us have been paying attention to what's happening with our school system in some ways or shape or form, and you know, there are various kinds of assessment. There are diagnostic assessment, is it the grade 1 diagnostic test or something of that nature, you know, to determine where the children are when they come into school and so on. And so that's basically what we're talking about. A diagnostic test, though, is a well-designed diagnostic test is really something that experts would need to design. But for our purposes in the classroom, we can do a little test that give us some ideas of where our students are, what they've learned, if they really have the content knowledge. Because sometimes people are teaching and then you realize that the students are not understanding the content I'm teaching, because what should have been taught before, what they should have come to us with from another course and so on, they don't have it. And so they can't really deal with the content that we are trying to give them, because we're not building on what we ought to build on. Yes, you had a? Okay. Yes. Absolutely. I think we're trying to get another microphone so that we can move a little faster. So we talk about classroom assessment techniques. What is classroom assessment? Systematic collection and analysis of information to improve educational practice and so on. This is taken from text, classroom assessment and grading that work. one of the things as lecturers we must remember as we think about assessment is what we often refer to as the first principle of assessment. And we belabor this point anytime we come to workshops of this nature. We must remember at all times that assessment is about our objectives, our learning outcomes. We want to determine if our learning outcomes have been realized. And it is not right for lecturers to put other material in the assessment that weren't discussed, that weren't taught, that's not on the syllabus. We can't say, well, these are MSBM students who are, you know, doing a MBA, and so they should know, even when we didn't teach them that. So we talk about constructive alignment. And all our syllabuses and our teaching should be aligned. And of course, the assessment. We identify learning outcomes or learning objectives. Here at Mona, we tend to use these terms interchangeably, learning outcomes and learning objectives. So if you hear me switch between them, not all educational experts perhaps will agree. But for us, I think we have settled it at UWI Mona, certainly from the AQUA, Academic Quality Assurance Committee perspective, that we use them interchangeably in this academic community. All right? So we design our assessment tasks based on our objectives. And we teach to ensure that our students at the end of the day can engage in these assessment tasks. Almost every semester we hear students complaining that some of the things that come on the test or the exam, they never do it, you know, and I don't know how true that is, because, you know, you have to take some of the things that our students say with a grain of salt, especially when, or perhaps more, a teaspoon. When they go to an exam and they feel they did badly, you know, then everything is the teacher's fault, you know. But one or two of us, I believe, might be guilty, perhaps not in this room, so I'm not throwing stones. I don't know. I don't know how you teach, but I hope you all teach very well, because my son is coming in next year and he wants to come to MSBM. Yeah, okay? All right. All right, so here on this slide, we talk about, and I don't think you can see, oh, well, yes, Fink. This is from the work of Fink, D. Fink, who is an outstanding curriculum expert in the United States. He runs curriculum and assessment workshops all over the United States, and he has published quite widely on this subject. And he talks about, in one of his books, educative and auditive assessment. Now, where are you on this continuum? Well, if we could think of it as a continuum. So he says, auditive assessment, which he feels we do a lot in institutions of higher education across the world. It's backward-looking assessment. It's just about grading, really, to get the students to the next course or the next year group and so on. But he says for educative assessment, we are going to do a number of things, and it would lead to better learning. So it is forward-looking. It involves opportunities for self-assessment. You set out criteria and standards and so on, and so you might be using a lot of rubrics and all of these things in your classes. And it creates opportunities for what he calls fidelity feedback. And if we are engaged in that process, we are going to cause better learning to occur. And what he calls fidelity feedback is this. And we'll come back to that when we're talking about feedback. So feedback ought to be frequent. I think that's what Dr. Graham was trying to say, that, you know, some persons are concerned, or some of our external persons are concerned about that. Immediate, discriminating based on criteria and standards, and it should be given in a loving and supportive way. We're going to talk, this is not the section, we're going to come to talk about feedback, because too often our students complain about feedback. It is demoralizing, I hear some students saying, and so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about feedback, but let's continue on assessment, and then in a few moments we should be able to talk more about feedback. Now, as we think about assessment, we can think about assessment in various ways, but I have put in your folders, or you'll receive a handout that has about 6 or 7 circles, and it's really about the assessment cycle. I'm sorry our printer wasn't doing as well as it should, and so it might not be as bright as we would have loved it to be, but I think you can see it. It's about the assessment cycle. And so as members of this academic community, we should be thinking about assessment, designing and our assessment based on some of these things that we're going to talk about. So the first thing we need to think about, notice in the middle, it says framework of principles, guidelines, vision, possible restrictions. Now, what in this institution would you want to think about at the beginning when we're thinking about assessment that would provide some kind of vision or some kind of framework? What in this institution would you think about that might give you that kind of information? About the vision, about the framework, how you go about it, or so on. Yes, Craig. Right. But what I was looking for though, Craig, I'm not so sure if I'm asking the course outline, are there any principles, and where would they be? The mission of assessment. I think that is going to come from perhaps if there is a guideline up by MSBM, but importantly, and I meant to have put it on the slide, but I forgot, the examination regulations, assessment regulation. And we just published a new exam regulations, are updated. Not many faculty pay attention to it, but all the things about assessment, certainly for the undergraduate level, are in the examination regulations, and it is online. So just go to the internal, what we call the internal network? The intranet, thank you. Just go to the intranet, and if you type in examination regulations, look for the one that come up for the 1st of August, I believe, 2018, and it is there. It's a long document, so it will take you some time to go through. It's about 60 pages. Or if you want it, I can send it to you, you know. So, you know, it's PDF, you can download it, but I can actually send it, and it can be distributed. That's the, for undergraduates. Now, the graduate regulations would have information pertinent to the graduate assessment procedures. So that's where the vision comes from. That's where the framework comes from. And of course, this is, in a sense, and somebody said it, going to be expressed on the course outline in some. Because, you know, in some course outlines, you're tied into the assessment because it's very tight there. And the ACWA usually say, you don't need to tell us everything and the details, because you lock lecturers into that framework. You know, say you need to give a test that is this long and that, and so on and so forth. We know that most of our assessment is about an exam at the end, you know, and then perhaps you might have a mid-semester, you might have some coursework, and so on. But it is there, and the truth and in fact is that oftentimes we're kind of locked into that. There are other courses that we have, leeway coursework. We might be able to do more authentic assessment, but that's the framework. That's what the institution has established, and pretty much we have to work within those parameters. So, we talk about vision, we talk about framework, and you notice the circle is there in the middle because the other things devolve from this framework. Then we talk about design, and you have a circle up there on the diagram. You're going to design your assessment tasks or your assessment tools. We call them a number of things. Your assessment tasks. And you have to think of your learning objectives. You have to think of the activities, and of course, what am I going to design? How am I going to design? Am I going to give a test? Are we like Dr. Shevers, who prepares them well beforehand? And, you know, he's one of our outstanding lecturers. I've been a Guardian Life recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award some years ago, and we still call on him to talk to our new lecturers and so on because we value his expertise. Well, of course, we have certain restrictions that we perhaps can't get over based on the course, because that has been passed in a huge way by the Board of Undergraduate Studies or the Board of Graduate Studies. So you get a course that says you need to write an exam. You might think that this course would do better with just coursework. But you can't just take it upon yourself at the right now, you know, and just say, well, I'm not following this. I'm just going to give coursework. It's not supposed to happen that way. You can pursue a change, but it might take a little while. And so perhaps for this semester, you'd have to use the syllabus as is and pursue that change, and next semester you change. Yes. Right. So I think in many cases you might have to do that. I've heard lecturers say that, but there's a process. What we're saying is there is a process. Lecturers should not take it upon themselves to just change because we operate within a framework. That's the message. There is a process. You know, we make the submissions through your FACWA. But you have a faculty one first, and then the person responsible will take it forward to Aqua if it needs to go to Aqua, and so on. All right, so that vision, so you have your course now, you're ready to teach, you begin to design your assessment. You know, you create your assessment, design what you're going, and design here, you know, you're just mapping out perhaps on paper what we need. Perhaps we need this type of exam, these types of questions, and so on. And then we move forward to the actual construction. So design and constructions are twofold. Design, and then we construct them. And what was important here is grading scheme or marking scheme, or if you're going to use a rubric for some of your assignments, possibility for answer, a model answer, and then hip hip hooray, feedback plan. What am I going to say to the students? So those assignments for this coursework, a feedback plan. Not many of us think about that when we are constructing our assignments. How am I going to get feedback to them? Am I going to provide written feedback? Am I going to provide a general feedback in terms of in class? Am I going to use the technology available, do a little podcast, or so on? Am I going to record something? All of these are possibilities. Yes, Sharon.
So I'm just thinking, so for example, for the course that I teach now in Mona School of Business, well, in any one class, I'll have 100 and odd students, right? And I remember going to the exam, like the first half an hour, and when I saw the room, I was like,
actually like 600 and odd students in all. And so when I go to do the lectures, I am constantly challenging myself because it's a multiple choice, as Dr. Graham says. It's a multiple choice, 100 multiple choice for the mid-semester, 100 multiple choice at the exam. And I'm saying, how do I give the kind of assessment and feedback? So here is it. Every semester I have to be thinking, okay, for this particular course, I'm going to do teams, for example. I'm going to let them come together in a team, build a train, and without talking, and then give them about the lessons. It is hard to give that kind of assessment, and I'm concerned about deep learning and the feedback and all of that when you have this kind of structure.
Yeah, it's always challenging in this situation. One of the things that I know lecturers in other contexts where you have large situations have done is really to empower our students to also give feedback to each other. So peer feedback is growing in importance. I was a student many years ago in a class in the United States, well, in a doctoral level class, and we wrote a paper. I don't remember what it was. And the lecturer collected the material, collected our learning outputs, and she took it away, and we thought she was going to mark it. The following week, she distributed the, whatever it was, let's say the essay or what have you, and she gave us some guidelines. So we each received somebody else's paper, and she wanted us to review based on the guidelines she had provided and write comments to the students who we had received. And this was being done at the graduate level, so you know, we were all pretty much mature people and so on. And so she took the comments on a separate sheet and she distributed them to each student. And then she took the paper back, she took back the papers. And I imagine she reviewed them, I don't know, but you know, you ended up with a mark. But one of the things that means that you received feedback from your peer. In a lot of cases you didn't even know, but you know, it was somebody in the class based on the guidelines that she had provided. And I think in a lot of large classes, we have to empower our students to offer feedback to each other. We have to train our students. One of the things I see cropping up in the literature, and I tell you something about feedback and my own experience about last year with it. I see cropping up in the literature, which hitherto we have not talked about, that we need to train our students about how you receive feedback. That's something I've never thought about. I just picked it up because I've been reading on feedback over the last year or two. And some of the researchers in this field, are saying that we need to offer training, and they provide some tips about how you receive feedback. And we will say something more on that. But feedback is one of the areas of education, giving feedback, receiving feedback, that has received enormous research over the last few years, especially out of the UK. Educators in the UK, in UK universities, is one of the hottest topics for research. And so a lot of new information is available if we are reading journals, assessment and evaluation journals. We would notice that there are lots of articles on feedback. So we conduct the evaluation. We're following the steps, conducting the evaluation. What apparatus will you need in conducting it? Where will you conduct, if it is an examination, how will you go about it? Certainly for mid-semesters and for the final exam and so on, there's quite a bit of preparation to be made, and if it's a test and so on. But how is it going to be conducted? or if it's a take-home final, or well, we don't do take-home final here. It's a take-home test, or that sort of thing. It's an online test. Are you going to use ORVLE to do it, or is it a paper to take home? What guidance would be needed, and so on. So we need to talk about, we need to ensure that students are properly prepared for their assessment tasks as much as possible. Because sometimes the students are at bay and they're asking everybody what you think about this, how you should go about. Ensure that clarity is received as much as possible, because students complain a lot about this too. And the next item, based on the diagram that you have in front of you, is grading and feedback. Grading, we have to think about grading and feedback. I believe the comment was that we are not consistent sometimes with our feedback. So students complain they get no feedback whatsoever. So grading and feedback, and I know for the large classes it's very problematic. It is problematic, and this is why we're suggesting that there are times when we can use peer feedback. Although it is perhaps disingenuous of some of our students to say that, because they don't come classes. That's what Sharon was just telling us. They don't. So how are you going to receive feedback? You're not engaging with the lecturer any at all. You only show up for exams or major tests, and then you complain. So that's part of the problem. You know, a lot of our students are full-time students, are full-time workers, although they register as full-time students. That's something we perhaps know, but that's part of the problem why some of them can't come class. Yes? Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, you have to. That's what I mean, that we need to empower our students to give feedback. First of all, they need to know they can give feedback. That's the first thing. Secondly, they need to know that feedback coming from a fellow student or peer is not necessarily bad, or they must disregard it. You know, because they sometimes want it directly from you. The how is extremely important. Yes, absolutely. But I would like to say also, you have said it very nicely, some of us as lecturers also need to learn some of those things. Because some of us, the feedback is terse, and it's not so much what we are saying, but it's how we have said it that demoralizes our students. All right, Sharon, you want to say something else?
In the large class, what I've done sometimes is put them in groups, and they might go through a topic and they are going to present it. So before I give my feedback, I normally ask the students to give their feedback. But one of the things I always tell them, start with the positive. What went well? The moment they start with the negative, that's a pushback from the peers.
Yeah, well, and that's fair. Well, I suppose, yes, I suppose, you know, we're talking a lot about feedback now. I suppose that as lecturers, we've got to ensure that our own choice of words, because it's oftentimes how we say what we have to say. We come from a culture. We come from a culture where the lecturer is large and in charge. And sometimes I fell in that trap myself. We do not think through necessarily what impact will this have. I mean, I meant well. I gave feedback to a student some time ago, and you know, she cussed me off and sent me a note and so on. And perhaps after looking back, you meant well. You're hoping that you would use the information to improve, but you might just have coined it in certain ways that you did not think would impact the lecture. You have to think through. Regardless of all of that, you might still hurt somebody, you know, but let us ensure that we think it through, think of the implications, and coin it as best as we can. Because this topic is fresh in my mind, because we were doing the assessment in higher education course this week, and we were talking about that yesterday. I'm coming to you, Olivine. And a student in the class, a lecturer here, gave an, you know, I didn't get her permission, but I just say to say it. But you know, she said that when she did her PhD, the external examiner said she needed to resubmit, and she was giving her experience about feedback, and she was floored and annoyed. Eventually, she came around, but she said when she read his comments and how they were kind, where they were written to the person here at Mona. This is an external man in Australia. And he said, this student should be warmly encouraged to resubmit this paper because. Now think about it. Not many of us. Just that phraseology. Totally different. I perhaps would have said, this student needs to resubmit. Bam. You see the difference there? This student needs to be warmly. That for me was breathtaking, was refreshing, because I know I would not have coined those terms in that way. It had a different impact than this student needs to resubmit next month and leave it bam. Somebody wanted to say something. Was it Olivine? Yeah.
Saying that the feedback should be valuable as well as kind, because we try things in sociology where students work together and then the students grade each other's contribution to the project or to whatever it is that they're doing, and everybody gives everybody else 100%, but that isn't necessarily true. It's because, you see, you don't want to spite me in the next class or in some way get me back for giving you something that is honest. I feel you didn't add enough and you're going to get back at me later. But that is not valuable, and that is not helping anybody, and that's not teaching anybody anything, to give me 100% for having done less than 100% work.
Which goes back to your point, to the point about teaching persons how to assess, how to give the feedback, you know, so that at the end of the day, you can say, I gave this based on XYZ, and don't just end up giving 100, despite the fact that the comments that you make are not commensurate with that 100.
All right, so we were at the point on the assessment cycle where we're talking about grading and feedback, and one of the things we are saying, when you're designing your assessment tasks and planning for assessment, plan also about feedback. And we hear that there are our accreditors and so on, I suppose the professional accreditors and others would feel that we should be giving more consistent feedback to our students. And then, of course, analyzing what our students have done. See the circle analysis, student performance, assessment quality, teaching quality. We need to grow and develop as what we call reflective practitioners, as reflective teachers. And so we will look back over what we have been doing in the classroom. Was this assessment valid and reliable? We could think about that. Validity and reliability. If you give a complete multiple choice test, do you do item analysis? Do you look at the difficulty of the items? If everybody get this item correctly, you know, what does it say about the item? Was it too easy? Because every good test must have some kind of discrimination within it, and so on. So there are a number of things we talk about in the assessment course and otherwise about how we set the tests. Was the coverage correct? You know, am I paying more attention to parts of the test or parts of the course than I ought to, and forgetting about others and so on. So content coverage based on the objectives we're teaching, all of these things should factor into this analysis. And of course, how did the students, you know, do? How did they do on this test? Very important. If they all fail or they're failing badly, what is it saying about teaching? Am I really reaching them? What is it about teaching quality? Perhaps our evaluation would help us to look at that. And then you will have to make some judgment on your overall performance and your overall teaching performance. Sorry, the overall outcome of the course, the students. Did I achieve the goals of this course? Did we achieve the desired educational effect? And we talk about validity, reliability, and so on. So analysis and evaluation would go hand in hand. Because once you have the information, then you can make the judgment or the statement about what we do. So this assessment cycle, I think, is important. We should pay attention to developing assessment, but not just writing the test. There are some other hoops that sometimes we do not pay attention to. And especially that grading and feedback. You know, we have to have meaningful mark schemes. And if you're going to second mark a paper, the second marker should be receiving a mark scheme from you as to how. I've often heard lecturers say they receive papers to be second mark and no mark scheme. And I wondered how this could happen. What you're going to mark? And then it reached me just this week, because I got a set of papers to mark the second mark. And there was no mark scheme, which has never happened. I always second mark for School of Education. But somebody sent me a set of papers. And I'm saying, what am I marking? I don't know how this lecture, I've never second marked for her. This is the first I'm going to second mark this course that she taught. And you know, and then they were having moderation a few days time, so they really wanted me to review the papers. But it does not do you any justice. You know, you can't be engaging in best practices when you are reviewing papers, not too sure what the first marker was looking for. And I wasn't too sure because a number of the questions I would like to see more, but based on what was on the paper, I suspected that that's what she thought. Had I had a longer time, I would have sent them back to her and asked her to send me the mark scheme, because I couldn't engage in best practices with, you know, reviewing papers that I had no mark scheme to demonstrate how she had marked. All right, so the assessment cycle, I commend that to you in terms of developing your tasks, assessment tasks. All of us will have to ask ourselves what we will do. As again, we pointed out earlier on that sometimes you're locked into certain kinds of assessment because the syllabus or the course outline that we've received would have indicated that this course will be assessed using a 2-hour exam, a mid-semester, and essay or something like that, a take-home essay. And so you're kind of locked into that in terms of the formal assessment. But we remember we talked earlier on formative assessment, and you can have many types of formative assessment in your classrooms. So tests, quizzes, projects, and so on are usual exams. And then we talk about real-life assessment. Some of us are able to do that. Internships, for instance, where they actually are on the job and so on. Work experience kinds of stuff. And other real-life or real-to-life experience. And alternative assessment tasks. We will look at these more. So classroom assessment traditionally consisted of selected response tests or exams. Your multiple choice is a major example of a selected response. Others of us use different kinds of selected response too, but multiple choice, filling in the blanks would come in that category. Matching items. I know some of these might be used in various areas. They might not be used in formal end-of-year exams, what we call summative exams, but they can be used in formative ways and provide great opportunities for engagement in our class. You know, you just give them a little test with a few matching items, and we talk about them after they have done them. You know, to test where they are, to learn, you know, and we'd have to encourage in a lot of cases students to do these things, because I'm told students don't want to do some of these activities if they are not getting any grade. And our constructed response items akin to our essay types or activities that we have to construct response. Annotated bibliographies in your, perhaps in your communications course, or policy paper in sociology and other disciplines that might utilize these things. We started off this morning by engaging in what we would call a classroom assessment technique, CATS, a CAT, a think, pair, and share. It is oftentimes referred to as classroom assessment technique. And so innovative assessments, a lot of these are now available, and we have a sheet with a number of them. And then we can engage in authentic assessment, your authentic, anything that is real to life. In some disciplines, they use a lot of them. In this area, you might have work experience. Case studies for some people, yes. For some people, there is a difference of opinion, again, because education is not necessarily as you know, as scientific as some other disciplines. So some of the authors or authorities will say, yes, case studies, if it is a real-to-life case studies. And some people say the authentic activity must be real life, not real-to-life. But we will accept them, because you will see real-to-life, real-to-life. And if it is on that premise, then definitely the case study. Alternative will be still a little different. So something can be authentic and definitely will fit into the category as an alternative. It is an alternative to, say, the regular book and pen. Okay? Exam, the book and pen exam. So it's an alternative if it is. So if your students are going to make a presentation, right. Yes, it will definitely be alternative. And nowadays, we have a lot of assignments that can be done using technology. Multimedia presentation, you might ask them to create a video on something and present it, and so on. Or just basically using our VLE for some of the activities that we're talking about, but it is now being done on our VLE, I think. Or I don't know how much you use it in MSBM, but certainly our colleagues in medicine, in the medical faculty, use it a lot for their exams. That's our VLE. So classroom assessment techniques And these are excellent for teaching and learning, and of course to give you feedback as to what is happening in your classroom. The use of small-scale data gathering techniques conducted continuously by teachers to determine what students are learning in a given class. And they are low-threshold activities. They don't cause any great anxiety because, as exams and so on, the students will get rapid feedback as to what they are doing. So, these are some of the ways also we can ensure that some feedback is given. All right, and we have a number of characteristics here of these. Number 3 here on this, we just did that. I have two handouts because I wanted to focus on that. There is one, classroom assessment techniques, which if you open it, you will notice that it talks about some of them. Plan for assessment techniques. What do I want to know on page 3? Which techniques will I use to get this information and why? And then it tells us about some on page 4. So for instance, a technique that lecturers have used successfully, the muddiest point. In today's lesson, what was clear to you? What was the muddiest point? And sometimes, at the end of the lecture or the class, you could ask the students to just write on a slip of paper. The truth is, you might have to warmly encourage them to participate in these things, because I know lecturers have tried it. Lecturers have told me they have tried to do some of these classroom assessment techniques, and students have not been as cooperative as they would have liked. But I mean, if you have a class of 100, don't expect you're going to get 100 students participating. When you start and you're encouraged, you might get 20 or 25, and you might increase it to, but they're not all going to participate, because unless you're going to give them a mark, a grade, for it. The 1 minute paper is another good one on page 4. 1 minute paper. What was the most useful or the most meaningful you learned this session? What questions do you have as we end this session? These are important questions, things that are simmering in their minds that they're not too clear about. They might want to document and list for you. You're going to take them, you're going to review them, because this is 1 minute, so it shouldn't be too dauntable, and the next class you're going to report on them. Thank you for asking that. You're going to report on them at the next class. So these are the things that you said, and if you continue to do something like that and they see you giving them feedback, then others will be encouraged to participate. Somebody wanted to ask a question.
We had to do a reflective bit at the end of every class, and you submit it and you get a grade for it.
Right. Well, as we have indicated, we are not yet at the point where we can do that as members of the UWI community. Even so, because we are locked into an assessment system. We might not be able to do that easily, say like give a activity every class and it's graded and so on. We might not be able to do that easily. I think as we move on, as we revise our courses and so on, we can embrace some of these things. In fact, perhaps we need to. Yes. Somebody else, sir, at the back, can you just give her the mic? Oh, but we have people at Western Campus, so that's why we're trying to get the mic.
Thank you. Afternoon. Okay. Question. You raised a point a while ago that based on the university system and how the assessment is shaped, the reflective piece, couldn't that be used to supplement the participation grade? Because the fact that persons are reflecting and sharing, whether verbally or in the written form, what they have learned, then it's a form of participation. Because the next class, you could randomly select some of the responses that you got, or at the end of that very same class and share with the team, or share with the students. Yeah. That's a suggestion I have.
Yes, some courses, not all courses, some courses have a participation grade, perhaps of 5%. Aqua was not too keen on making it more than 5%. I understand there might be a few courses that allow 10, but I think it is 5% generally at the undergraduate level that is allowed. So yes, that could be a way to increase one's participation grade. This is something that people are always concerned about when we say participation. How do we check it? There are some rubrics available that people have developed to grade participation in courses, but how do we give them a participation grade? Is it the student that talks the most and so on? Because some of our students are very quiet. And because you don't talk a lot, are you disadvantaged and so on? Do you do things like that, like the classroom assessment techniques or those reflective papers, which might be a better mechanism to provide a participation grade. So that is still up in the air as to how we do this properly using the best methods available. What some lecturers say is that pretty much everybody gets it at the end of the year. If it's a 5%, once you come class, I think a lot of persons align it to attendance. It's not an attendance mark, but you earn it if you come to class. So if you come to class but you didn't say anything, the lecturer oftentimes give you it nevertheless. Colleagues have said that. Because for a lot of persons, the real interest in that participation grade is attendance. So we have to deter. But you're not going to get a course pass with an attendance grade, that you're going to get a grade just for attendance. I don't think the boards responsible at UA are going to pass those courses. If it is attendance and participation, it is more likely to pass. All right. I'm told that we're going to have some coffee break at some point. So you want us to, it's to break now, so we break for like 15 minutes? We finish at 1. All right, so we break now for coffee break for about 15 minutes, and then if we're not finished, we can take in. Okay, just get it and take it inside so that we can continue. All right, thank you. Continue. All right. With respect to our Western Campus friends, they can, somebody was asking about the questions and so on for them, they can actually send in their questions through the live chat, I'm told. So if we would just pay attention to that. Eliza? Okay, Elijah. Okay. Well, both of them are from the Bible, Eliza and Elijah. Yeah, but Elijah. I want to get it right. Okay. So you could, the live chat, can you just pay attention to that? No, you can get it on your phone, I'm told. You don't have it on yours? Oh, okay. Okay, so we were talking about authentic assessment and alternative assessment, and we had made the point that alternative assessment is about alternative to the pen and paper exams, and there are a number of things that we could talk about in this area that we could associate with alternatives or alternative assessment. All right, and a list of them is on this slide. We're just bringing them to your attention. I'm certain some of us already are involved in some form of alternative assessment, perhaps some kind of authentic assessment, and these are good. The important thing is to ask ourselves the question, to what extent are these valid and reliable means of assessing our students? And where we do workshops too on validity and reliability of assessments and so on. But those certainly from a classroom assessment perspective can be reviewed by